Welcome back to Event Impact 360. Today we're diving deep into a situation that's unfolding right now and raising a ton of questions about immigration and due process and, executive power. Imagine being deported to a foreign prison without a trial, just based on accusations.
Right.
That's what hundreds of Venezuelans are facing right now.
It is a story with so many layers, and I think to really understand it, we need to kind of go back and start with the context.
Yeah.
Over the past few years, millions of Venezuelans have fled their country because of economic collapse and just rampant gang violence.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, were hoping to reach the U.S., seeking asylum and a chance to rebuild their lives.
So we have a large and vulnerable population seeking refuge.
Exactly.
And then you have this specific accusation from the Trump administration. They're claiming that these individuals that are being deported are members of this dangerous Venezuelan gang called Tren de Aragua.
Right, and that's really where the story takes, I think, a really alarming turn to carry out these deportations. The administration is using this law called the Alien Enemies Act. Now, this law dates back to 1798.
Wow.
And essentially, it grants the president the power to detain or deport foreigners during wartime. And it kind of bypasses the typical immigration procedures and safeguards.
Wait, so they're using a law from the 18th century to deport people based on accusations of gang affiliation.
Right.
That sounds incredibly problematic.
It is. And, it's raising huge concerns about due process, which, to put it simply, means that everyone is entitled to fair treatment through the judicial system. It guarantees things like the right to a hearing, the right to present evidence, the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. And in this case, those basic rights seem to be just totally disregarded.
It's like they're being stripped of their legal protections and just shipped off to a foreign prison based on unproven allegations.
Yeah.
It's unsettling, to say the least.
It is. And to make matters worse, the law they're using, this Alien Enemies Act, it has a really troubling history. It was used during World War II to justify the internment of Japanese Americans, which was, a shameful episode that many consider a gross violation of human rights.
So the alarm bells are ringing, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
The ACLU, for example, is already challenging the use of the law in this case.
Yeah.
Arguing that it goes way beyond Trump's authority.
Right.
But, in the meantime, deportations have already begun.
Yeah, they have. And the process was really shockingly swift. Venezuelans were rounded up, moved to Texas, and then flown to El Salvador with very little warning.
Wow.
Leaving families, completely in the dark and lawyers scrambling to file emergency lawsuits.
It sounds chaotic and almost intentionally designed to avoid scrutiny.
It does. And actually, a judge issued a temporary order to block the deportations, citing serious concerns about due process and the potential for false accusations. He recognized the gravity of the situation and, the need to ensure that these individuals' rights were protected.
Okay, so there was an attempt to stop this.
Yeah.
That's a glimmer of hope, right?
Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. Because of a technicality in the judge's order,
oh no,
2 planes full of deportees were already en route and couldn't be recalled.
Wow.
They landed in El Salvador.
Oh my goodness.
And that's where another really key player enters the picture, Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador.
Bukele's a controversial figure, to say the least.
He is.
He's known for his strongman tactics and his embrace of Bitcoin, which has made headlines around the world.
Right. But in this story, what matters most is the prison where these deportees have been sent, Cecot, a mega prison built to hold 40,000 inmates. And let me tell you, Cecot is notorious.
Before we get into the details of Cecot, I want to pause for a second and remind everyone watching, if you're finding this deep dive informative, please hit that subscribe button.
Yeah.
Give the video a like and share it with your friends. It helps us get the word out and continue these important conversations.
Absolutely.
Now back to this mega prison in El Salvador. What makes Cecot so notorious?
Well, it's known for its harsh conditions, extreme overcrowding, and severely limited access to basic necessities like food and water and medical care. It's a place where human rights are routinely violated, and it's raising really serious concerns about the fate of these deportees.
And to add another layer of complexity to this already tangled web reports, indicate that the U.S. paid El Salvador millions of dollars to house these deportees.
Yes, this financial agreement raises a whole host of questions about motives and transparency. Why was this deal struck? What are the long-term implications? And most importantly, how will it impact the lives of the individuals who are now effectively trapped within this brutal prison system? It really creates a situation where economic interests might be prioritized over human rights and due process.
Right.
And it raises serious concerns about El Salvador's ability and, willingness to ensure the safety and humane treatment of these individuals.
So we have this backdrop of a controversial law, a rushed deportation process, and a notorious prison in a country led by a leader who, let's just say, isn't exactly known for respecting the rule of law.
Right.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It is. And unfortunately, the individuals caught in the middle of this, are paying the price. They're facing indefinite detention in a brutal prison system, separated from their families, and with very limited legal recourse. Their lives have been completely upended, their futures uncertain, and their rights potentially violated.
It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can change, especially in the realm of immigration policy. One day you're seeking asylum, hoping to build a new life, and the next you're being shackled and flown to a foreign prison based on accusations you can't even defend yourself against.
Yeah, and the speed at which this all unfolded, I think, is particularly troubling. It raises concerns about whether these individuals were given adequate opportunity to present their cases, to access legal counsel, or even just to contact their families.
And the imagery coming out of El Salvador is chilling. Videos show these men, disembarking the plane, shackled heads, bowed, being herded by armed guards. It's such a powerful visual that I think underscores the dehumanizing nature of this entire situation.
Yeah, those images are deliberately crafted to convey a message of dominance and control.
Right.
It's a tactic often used by authoritarian regimes to instill fear and obedience.
It's a stark contrast to the images we often see of migrants seeking asylum. Families huddled together, children clinging to their parents' faces, etched with worry and hope. These images from El Salvador are devoid of any humanity. It's almost as if they're being treated like criminals before they've even had a chance to prove their innocence.
Right. And the conditions inside Cecot prison only amplify the sense of despair. We're talking about, overcrowded, windowless cells crammed with dozens of inmates with very limited access to water, sanitation, and medical care. It's just a recipe for suffering, disease, and psychological trauma.
It's hard to imagine the psychological toll that kind of environment would take on anyone, especially those who've already endured so much trauma, fleeing their homeland and seeking refuge.
And you have to remember, a lot of these individuals haven't even been convicted of any crime.
Right.
They're being held based on accusations without a fair trial or a chance to defend themselves. It raises a fundamental question: at what point do national security concerns override individual rights? And where do we draw the line when it comes to due process and the right to a fair hearing?
These are questions that societies have been grappling with for centuries, and they're particularly relevant, I think, in a world facing increasing global instability and mass migration.
Right. And this case, I think, also highlights the often overlooked role of financial incentives in shaping immigration policy. The fact that the U.S. reportedly paid El Salvador millions of dollars to house these deportees, raises ethical red flags.
It suggests that a country's economic interests might be prioritized over the well-being of individuals. It also raises questions about transparency and accountability. How was this deal negotiated? Who benefits from it? And what safeguards are in place to ensure the humane treatment of these deportees?
Right. And we can't ignore the chilling possibility that this could become a blueprint for other countries facing similar challenges. If the U.S. can deport individuals based on flimsy accusations and bypass traditional legal procedures, what's to stop other nations from adopting similar tactics?
It's a scary thought, and one that could have devastating consequences for refugees and asylum seekers worldwide. It would set a dangerous precedent that undermines international norms and erodes trust in the global system of refugee protection.
Right, and that's why I think it's so crucial to pay attention to this case and to demand accountability from those in power. The actions of the Trump administration, the response of Nayib Bukele, and the relative silence of the international community all contribute to a worrying trend of disregard for human rights and the rule of law.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed and even helpless in the face of such blatant injustice. But we can't allow ourselves to become complacent or desensitized to the suffering of others. We need to stay informed, engage in critical discussions, and hold our leaders accountable for upholding basic human rights.
It's a reminder that the fight for justice and human dignity is ongoing and requires our constant vigilance and active participation.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by just the complexity and injustice of this whole situation.
Yeah.
But we can't allow ourselves to, become complacent or desensitized to the suffering of others. We need to stay informed, engage in these critical discussions, and hold our leaders responsible for upholding basic human rights.
In this case, it's a stark reminder that we live in a world where information is abundant, but, really discerning truth from misinformation requires careful analysis and critical thinking. We're constantly bombarded with narratives from various sources, each with their own kind of spin and agenda.
So how do we navigate this information overload? How do we, separate fact from fiction and develop informed opinions?
Well, I think it comes down to asking the right questions. Who benefits from this particular narrative? What are the underlying assumptions? Are there alternative perspectives that are being silenced or marginalized? And perhaps most importantly, what are the potential consequences of accepting this narrative as truth?
It's about moving beyond, passively consuming information and engaging in active critical thinking.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even seemingly objective sources can be influenced by, biases or political agendas or financial incentives.
Right.
It's about developing a healthy skepticism and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
So this case, as complex and troubling as it is, presents a unique opportunity for reflection and action.
I agree.
It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our own society and the systems that govern our lives.
Right. What does it say about our values when we allow for the indefinite detention of individuals without due process? What does it say about our priorities when, economic interests seem to outweigh basic human rights?
Yeah.
I think these are questions that demand honest and critical self-reflection.
And beyond reflection, we need action.
Yes.
We can't simply stand by and watch as these injustices unfold. We need to use our voices, our resources, our collective power to push for change.
Absolutely. And there are concrete steps that we can take. We can support organizations like the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, which are actively challenging the use of the Alien Enemies Act, monitoring this litigation in El Salvador, and advocating for the humane treatment of these deportees.
We can also support, local organizations that provide legal aid and social services to immigrant communities. These groups are on the front lines, providing, vital support to those facing deportation or detention.
Exactly. And donating to these organizations, volunteering your time, or simply spreading awareness about their work, I think can make a real difference.
And let's not forget the power of our voices as citizens. We can contact our elected officials, share our concerns, and demand that they prioritize human rights in their policy decisions.
Every voice counts in the fight for justice. The more people that speak out against these injustices, the harder it becomes for those in power to ignore them.
This deep dive has been, eye-opening and thought-provoking. We've explored the complexities of immigration policy, the importance of due process, and the potential for abuse when executive power goes unchecked.
Yeah, it's a reminder that the pursuit of justice and a more equitable world requires our constant vigilance, critical engagement, and a willingness to challenge those in power.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparks some critical thinking, some challenging conversations, and perhaps even some inspiration to take action. Don't forget to subscribe to Event Impact 360, like this video, and share it with your friends so we can continue to explore these important issues together. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay informed.